What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. As discussed earlier this morning, an interview coming along this morning, one that I never thought was going to show up on this channel, but nonetheless, I give credit where credit is due. Cam Davies joins me today here on the channel to discuss the future of Alberta, Alberta Independence, what an independent Alberta may look like, and the importance of voting in this next by-election. I can honestly say, moving forward, before we go through with this interview, that I was skeptical. Make sure to stick around at the end of the interview to hear my 2 cents on what I've gathered from Cam Davies, what I think about the Alberta Republican Party, as well as what the future of Alberta should look like. Many people have their eyes on top of what's happening in this by-election for next week in Olds, Three Hills, to talk about, is the separatist movement, is the independence movement in Alberta gaining steam? Many pundits have their eyes on what's about to happen, and I think Cam Davies does a relatively good job of clearing the air. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, again, stick around afterwards to get my 2 cents, but without further ado, let's bring in Cam Davies. All right, Cam Davies, welcome back to The Fringe. Well, welcome into The Fringe for your first time here, I should say. Cam, a lot of questions. Albertans have a lot of questions. Now, I've seen that you've had very large turnouts in the Red Deer area when talking about running for Alberta Republicans, essentially the leader of Alberta Republicans. Some mixed messaging that came from my initial meeting with your representatives in Edmonton in early May at Ezra Levant's town hall for being done getting screwed, supposedly. There's a large movement in Alberta. People are talking about a referendum ballot in 2026. We've seen Danielle Smith saying that she's going to lower the threshold, making it very simple for Albertans to actually ask the question on a ballot, are we prepared to claim independence from Alberta? Now, one of the mixed messages that I got at the time that maybe you could clear up for me is they were talking a lot about 51st state. Albertans are talking about essentially just claiming its independence. Where does your party stand on what's best for Alberta?
We are called the Alberta Republicans because we firmly believe that Alberta is best served as a independent Alberta Republic.
Okay.
Nothing to do with the 51st state, nothing to do with any other government, foreign or domestic. We believe that the constitutional republic form of government, which, by the way, Barbados a few weeks ago just adopted. They're a member of the Commonwealth, and they say, you know what, this Westminster system is broken. It doesn't work for us either. And they just adopted a constitutional republic form of government. So over 30 members of the Commonwealth have adopted that form of government. We would not be alone in choosing a different path to govern ourselves. And so we're called the Alberta Republicans because we believe that a constitutional republic, an independent Alberta, should choose that form of government.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question, because there's been a lot of let's say let me reroute that. Right now we're looking at getting signatures essentially once we're allowed to announce that a question has been admitted to Alberta elections to put on a ballot for referendum in 2026. Why are we focusing on building a party right now instead of worried about working with other organizations like Alberta Prosperity, say, to garner our signatures and then worry about who's going to be in charge if we get a yes vote?
A question for you, and I guess and maybe to your audience, have we discussed on this show that it actually only takes a stroke of the pen, an order in council by the Premier's office to initiate a binding referendum? That forcing Albertans to go and collect petitions is actually a form of the UCP passing the buck. We had an equalization referendum a few years ago. It did not require us to go and collect signatures for a petition to force the government to do the right thing. So are we covering that this is a bit of a passing the buck by the UCP, forcing honest Albertans to go out there, collect signatures, to go through all the hoops? I mean, have you read the act around collecting signatures to do this? You have to wait for a month. You can't do anything. You have to get approved by Elections Alberta to even begin collecting signatures. And then you've got to carry your Elections Alberta ID card around with you. You can't leave signatures at the coffee table. You can't leave them at the cafes or the shops. You personally have to go in each and every riding and collect a certain amount of signatures. The hoops that the government is making Albertans jump through when a large number of Albertans, almost a majority, I would say, want a referendum, it's disingenuous. So when we hear the UCP say we're going to lower a threshold, but we're going to make sure that it doesn't get to a yes, I don't know about you, but when someone says, I want you to fail, but I'm going to make it easy for you to go in that other direction, we should start putting two and two together.
Right. So I understand what you're saying, but let me see if I understand this correctly, because you're saying that what at least what I'm understanding is that Danielle Smith could essentially just say we're declaring Alberta as independent. We've had enough. Is that
No,
correct?
no, what I'm saying is that she could, with a stroke of a pen, the UCP could schedule a referendum. No
Okay.
signatures required. Just
Okay.
like we did with the equalization referendum. They could schedule one.
But is it better not to have the backing of citizens that at least have a voice to say they are prepared to be on a referendum to scale where people sit? Because keep in mind that we're currently sitting at a
Mhm.
46 roughly percentage of Albertans who are prepared to put yes on a separation ballot or independence ballot
Sure.
on a question of referendum. So what about that other 54% that either aren't sure or are against it? Like surely this process, and don't get me wrong, I am fully on board for an independent Alberta. Um, but don't their voices matter? Isn't that something the province should take into consideration when posing such a question?
Absolutely. So instead of forcing one side or the other to stop start in a campaign perspective, because what that does is it reduces momentum. It provides lots of ammunition for the opposition. Instead of allowing that to occur, do the right thing, schedule a referendum, and let all sides campaign for or against.
Okay.
Gain support for or against, and then vote in it. That's all that's required. So what our frustration is we're seeing all these tripwires being put in place of whether that's the Alberta Prosperity Project, other grassroots initiatives that want a yes vote. But we're seeing stumbling blocks being put into place, delays, the stop start mechanism of you're having to collect pre-signatures now, and then you're going to have to go and collect actual physical signatures later, and then you're still waiting for the Alberta government to do the right thing and act on it. We're putting 5 or 6 steps ahead of ourselves that are really unnecessary, and they're unnecessary because we have a government in Edmonton right now that does not have a political backbone. That's the unfortunate part of this.
Okay. Um, now let's spin the gears forward and let's say hypothetically by-election goes through next week. You gain your seat as leader of the Alberta Republicans, and you're now in the Alberta legislature. And let's say we have a referendum vote and it fails. So are we essentially just installing more government at that point to like where do we go from there, I guess is my question. If we're just installing more parties, doesn't that just complicate things for Albertans moving forward?
Well, what we need in Alberta is a clear vote on a yes, coupled with a clear majority in our legislature that's willing to act on that yes. If you were to have a vote right now with the UCP MLAs, how many do you feel would vote to act on a yes vote? A third?
Well,
Half?
I will say through my contacts, it's been alleged that there's a considerable amount of UCP MPs that are actually
Yeah.
in favor of voting yes on a ballot. Now, whether or not that's hearsay
Sure.
and unconfirmed, I'll just leave out there in the cyber world. But um,
Maybe
I,
half, right?
we'll call it half just
Sure.
to be generous. But I guess my concern, Kim, and a lot of what we've seen coming up, and one thing I want to talk about is your run for leadership, essentially, because the idea of an independent Alberta is to get away from corrupt government. We want to get away from the liberals that essentially give us no power when it comes to the
For
table in
sure.
Ottawa. We don't have a voice when it comes to our voting. We don't have a voice when it comes to the Senate. We have no representation. We know the spiel.
That's
Um,
right.
but given your history in politics, uh, Albertans have asked, especially on this channel, the question of connections to Jason Kenney. Now, Jason Kenney has come out saying that Albertans who
Well, he
want
called us the
independence,
fringe minority. He called us
well,
the fringe last week. So
we're
rhetoric.
comparable to anti-vaxxers was his
Oh,
exact
it's
term.
ridiculous.
Um,
So
so
Derek,
so
the
you used to
reason.
work with Jason Kenney, though.
For for
And
for a period of time, I did, and like many Albertans, I thought that Jason Kenney could help solve the problems and actually stand up for Alberta, and I was wrong. And the reason you've got a whole bunch of wild and negative stories out there about me from almost a decade ago when I was in my mid 20s as a young guy, the only reason that you've got articles out there to have shows about is because I stood up to Jason Kenney when he asked me to be a doormat for him as a young
mhm.
guy. I said no. I stood up to Jason Kenney then, and I stood up to Jason Kenney again during COVID. And so there was a request that in Jason's team that you take one for the team, you lay on the floor for the boss, and he rolls over you. And I said absolutely not. I owned my part of that whole era, and I said here's what happened, but here's the full picture. I was asked to play a small role. I was not the architect, and I owned my part, and I've learned from my mistakes. But when a leader asks you to take a bullet for him, um, you need to stand up for yourself and you look yourself in the mirror, and that's exactly what I did. And I've learned from those mistakes, and I moved on. So when we talk about checks and balances within our government, we have none. We've had two MLAs recently get kicked out of the UCP. You talk about corruption. Have you covered on your show the now over $1 billion of corrupt care between the AHS and the Premier's office procurement pressure that have led to almost $1 billion in our tax dollars being shuffled off to individuals who have deep connections to the Alberta government? That is corruption. One of the largest issues we're going to face as an independent Alberta is investor confidence. And investor confidence is directly impacted by how investors view our government as far as where it lies on the corruption and picking winners and losers. And if we don't clean up our own house, then we're in deep trouble. And when we see infrastructure minister speaking up and saying, hey, there's fire in the house, we've got a problem here, and the response of the government is to kick that member out of the party, how are we going to get there? So in the interim, having two parties, having a Republican and a conservative coalition government, if one side or the other has their hand in the cookie jar, it gets smacked. We have to have checks and balances, and until we get to a constitutional convention where we can change our form of government to a constitutional republic with separations of power, so the premier or a governor or a prime minister or a president cannot dictate to legislature how they can and can't represent their constituents, a completely separate entity, we're not going to get there. So we have to have those checks and balances built into our system. And the way we do that right now is through coalition governments. And wouldn't it be a great thing to have, instead of what we see federally with the NDP and the Liberals, the NDP pulling the Liberals further and further to the left? Wouldn't it be an amazing thing to have a conservative party with a very conservative party pulling that party further and further to the right? Wouldn't that be a great thing?
It is. Don't get me wrong. It's always good when another party comes forward, but we've seen this before, and I know you were part of the Wild Rose initially, and that was a party that then formed into the UCP. Um,
Unfortunately.
yeah, yeah. So, and I know a lot about your exit from there, and we're not going to focus on that today because, again, I want to address things that, again, keep in mind, a quarter of Alberta's voting population watches this channel. Um, I have to focus on the things they've asked me to 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 question. One of those, and again, we talked about briefly. You'd mentioned you learned from your mistakes with the whole Jeff Callaway situation. Um, I just want to reiterate on that because the question that I get a lot of times from people are, look, if while you were in your 20s making mistakes, learning from those mistakes were still made. Now, the quote that I want to bring up is that Callaway and Kenny staff operated, quote, hand in glove with regard to various other aspects of the campaign. It says here, I was in constant communication with Matt Wolf, Blaise Bomer, both members of Jason Kenney teams in relation to attack ads, graphics, preparation of various speeches, and Jeff Callaway was to deliver from start to finish, literally from the launch of his speech to the debate prep attack lines to the final speech endorsing Jason Kenney. What many people worry about with that, and again, people can change, people can learn from their mistakes, is if you were prepared to do that in your 20s, what have you learned moving forward that won't say put you in a position of power where you say, I'll just do whatever it takes to get things done. And there's nothing wrong with doing whatever it takes, but within the bounds of legalities, within the bounds of how Albertans would expect a party to move forward. How do
Yeah.
Albertans put their trust that we're not going to see that kind of behavior again.
Well, I can tell you, I've not been on Jason Kenney's Christmas card list for almost a decade, because when I stand up against him, I was standing up for Albertans as well to expose exactly what that type of leader was, who would ask people to do those things for him. And when you talk about learning from those mistakes, I can tell you that learning experience, whether I liked it or not, and I definitely didn't enjoy it. I took severe lumps and learnings from that. But what I can tell you that it did do is it prepared me later in life. You see, when 2018 rolled around, I was serving in the U.S. military. COVID came around, and I signed onto a lawsuit with 13 other Marine Corps officers to protect over 3,500 Marines from the COVID mandates. And so standing up during that time against Kenney, I firmly believe prepared me to stand up for others, for our beliefs, and fight back against the tyrannical mandates of the Biden administration during COVID. And just like many Albertans had to stand up against Jason Kenney as well during the tyrannical mandates during COVID here in Alberta. And so we learn from those mistakes, and it prepares us for fights in the future that we may not even know we're going to face. And
Okay.
so it's hard to be thankful for those trying times, but they do prepare us to make stands that we could never have even imagined we would be facing.
Great. So I do want to ask a little bit about let's talk again by-election. We'll get off the hot button topics and move forward with platform here. Uh, let's say by-election goes through. Cam Davies gets his seat. The Alberta Republicans are now in the legislature. What does it look like moving forward on a referendum ballot? Do you see your party working in conjunction with organizations like APP to help get people on a yes vote and help grant signatures into that pool? Do you see us all working together, or is this going to be a separate entity that basically focuses on Alberta moving forward should we get a referendum vote?
I think both. However, there's confines in how we do that, and as I'm sure you're aware. I understand election law a lot better than I did in my mid 20s, and so there can't be official coordination between third parties and educational groups and political parties. That being said, if the method of getting to a referendum becomes that petition, which to my knowledge it isn't yet there, Elections Alberta and the NDP and other groups are trying to derail it at every turn. And so what we're going to do is continue advocating that the UCP government they should do the right thing, and they should schedule the referendum. And so we'll be pushing for that. If the petition side goes forward, then we will absolutely encourage people to sign that written petition that will count towards the signatures. And so we'll push for both, and we'll see which one gets it across the finish line. For us, it doesn't necessarily matter per se, as long as we get it across the finish line. So we want to make sure we're all horses attached to the same cart. We want the same thing. We want independence. Now, our ability in the legislature allows us to pressure on the political side. It allows us to pressure the politicians, predominantly those who were Jason Kenney supporters, to say, hey, if you're going to fight independence, you might lose your seat. If you're going to stop in the way, if you're going to put roadblocks in front of this movement, then there is a party who will take your seat from you.
Right.
And that's the role that we fill, is that without that political pressure, you're going to see MLAs, because they exist in the UCP, that want to fight this and stop this tooth and nail. And so our mission and our role is to make sure that if we can't get all conservatives behind independence, it's going to be very challenging to get it across the finish line, because we're not talking about 180,000 signatures. We're talking about 1.6 to 2 million Albertans that have to get behind this for it to succeed.
Okay. Now, speaking of all being on the same carriage here, the same horse pulling the same cart, uh, Marty up north has come out on a podcast this week to talk about a meeting that took place. A meeting that was supposed to remain secret that he made not so secret. And again, a lot of information has come out since then, that Preston Manning and others were sitting in that meeting. Is there anything you can elaborate on that Marty might have missed that maybe was discussed there for Alberta's future? Because again, I know Preston Manning's talked about a Western alliance in several different articles. Uh,
Mm.
Marty was saying that he left feeling good after everything was discussed at this meeting. What is your vision going forward? Like, are we seeing a team that's working together here, or is it just people floating ideas? Like, where are we at on that front?
I think there's a lot of discussions happening right now. There's a lot of different viewpoints. I've kind of steered away from this notion of what really was the Western Canada concept. I think Alberta has to focus on Alberta first. We're going to lead the charge, and you know what? Our friends in Saskatchewan, they might join us. I don't know if you saw the NDP commissioned a poll recently. I don't think they liked the results. 40% of Saskatchewan residents are in favor of independence, and they had to print it, which was even better. But Saskatchewan might follow along, and maybe even northern British Columbia at some point. But right now, our focus has to be on Alberta first. And so getting Alberta across the finish line and being an example that other provinces may want to follow, I think that should be our focus. And so that's what we're going to keep focusing on.
Great. So just to wrap up then, Cam, let's say Alberta Republicans get in, that you guys do very well in your by-elections, that the momentum is gained, that Albertans are indeed frustrated, they're ready to go. They want to back this horse. What are your guys' policies for an independent Alberta? What would you guys like to see in an independent Alberta if a yes vote goes through?
Well, we need a constitution where Albertans have a say as to what we are going forward, who we are going forward, how we want to govern ourselves. We need an actual Bill of Rights. I don't know if you watched the latest iteration of the Bill of Rights. It was completely watered down. It was neutered in many ways. It became a Bill of Privileges after the last UCP AGM. That was a travesty. We need an actual Bill of Rights in a new independent Alberta Republic. We're going to be fighting for those things: property rights, firearms ownership. We're going to be fighting for free speech. We're advocating for all of these things right now. Families is the cornerstone of our society. Defending against woke ideologies. I was glad to see that we don't use pronouns in our bios here and in our social media handles. We have to stop bending the knee to woke ideology. Get classrooms back to the focus of educating children instead of indoctrinating children. Make sure we understand that parents are the decision makers, not the government. Reducing the size of government. You know, right now, our current government has grown 18% larger in bureaucratic bloat than Rachel Notley's NDP. We have the largest deficit budget than the NDP. Who knew that by voting blue, we would get orange policies? We have to fight against those things. And so we're going to be advocating for true conservative principles, smaller government, no deficit spending. You know, we talk about saving for a rainy day. The Heritage Fund, there was victory laps a few months ago about adding $1 billion to the Heritage Fund. Well, that was borrowed money. We literally borrowed money to invest, and we still have credit cards we haven't paid off yet. No financial advisor would give you that advice. But we have a conservative government right now, in name only, that's suggesting that that's a good strategy when it's simply not. So we have to advocate for those things in a new Alberta Republic, that we have to get back to the basics: smaller government, prioritizing the things that actually matter instead of pet projects like high-speed rails when we have an incredible road system that needs repair. When we prioritize parking garages for the Edmonton Oilers, but we can't put hospital pads and helicopter pads at hospitals. We've got significant priorities that are out of sync right now, and we have a government that needs a recalibration. And so that's the purpose that we serve right now, is to help refocus our existing government and make sure that the NDP never win again by being pragmatic and working on a pragmatic conservative Republican coalition in the future.
Well, it all sounds great on paper, Cam, and I guess we'll wait and see what happens when the by-election wraps up next week. What is the temperature you're feeling around Three Hills and Olds? Like, how's it looking for you so far?
It's feeling positive. Voters here don't buy into the fear mongering. It's really great. Voters here understand the issues that face rural Alberta aren't necessarily being fought for in Edmonton. There seems to be a lot of pandering to inner city issues that didn't vote blue the last election. And so there seems to be an understanding that if we don't stand up for ourselves and our traditions and our values in rural Alberta, that we're going largely unheard in Edmonton. And so voters here don't buy into the fear mongering of vote splitting. This was a riding that stood up against the corruption of the PC party. in 2008, in 2012, and in 2015. And so they don't buy into this notion that vote splitting is an impact here. They believe in voting for their values and their principles. And so we'll just keep working away. We're a party that's only a few months old, and so we've got a lot of work to do. But the conversations have been positive so far.
Great, good to hear. Well, Cam, I appreciate you coming on the channel and again addressing the controversy because again, keeping people's eyes on the prize, which is essentially Alberta independence, is the number one goal here. We want everybody to have a clear vision moving forward. I think you present a very reasonable platform and one that again is probably worth noting for anybody living in that area. So again, best of luck to you in the by election, and well, maybe we'll see you in the Alberta legislature soon.
Thank you, and just a reminder to your viewers, if they do live in Olds, Disbury, Three Hills, June 23rd is election day, and I would ask for their vote. We have an opportunity to send Ottawa a message, and to send a message to Edmonton as well, that if your values aren't being fought for and represented right now, we can send that correction call, and not only get better government, but also have a fierce advocate, an unapologetic conservative that stands up for Alberta first, not Alberta next.
Excellent. Cam, thanks so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us here on the channel today. We look forward to seeing the results of that by-election. Again, folks, if you're in that area, please get out and vote. It's the best thing you could do. Make sure your voice is heard. Cam, again, thank you for joining us. Great to see you.
Thanks, Derek. Great to have you on. Thank you.
Take care. Wow. What an interview. Okay, so I do have to stipulate to you guys once and for all that while I was very biased at one point of Alberta Republicans, again, given my initial meeting with these individuals in early May at Rebel News' town hall in Edmonton, was commonly the image that this is a party that was pushing 51st state. Now, Cam, I feel, has done a good job of owning his mistakes, telling people exactly what they stand for, and it sounds to me like, at the very least, opposition that would be welcome within Alberta's parliamentary system, in the legislative. I think that Cam poses decent arguments. And as we've said on this channel, it's always good to question those who are in authority, meaning keeping our premier on her toes. Now, while I have been one who has backed Danielle Smith, I think that Danielle is one of the best premiers this province has ever seen. I do think that some healthy opposition, aside from the NDP, may be beneficial. I do believe that we may need other people, aside from Danielle Smith, giving a position in terms of what Alberta independence could look like. The decision, I guess, is up to those who are in Three Hills, Olds, Didsbury, that they should get out and vote in the by-election. If you think that Cam Davies is the best representative to lead Alberta the charge into an independent Alberta, now's the time to essentially give him his seat. I once talked about vote splitting. I said that I felt that this was the PPC of Alberta. I've actually changed my mind on that. I think that both talking to Cam inside and outside of this interview, I've gained a little bit of respect for what it is he's trying to do and will happily walk back and apologize for my comments earlier. And that's part of the reason we did this interview. It's always good that while you have a bias, you keep an open floor for those who want to come in and discuss their policies, discuss and defend themselves against accusations. And I think Mr. Davies has done that very well with this interview. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think down below in the comments. Are you in those ridings? Will you be voting in the by-election? Are you still looking for a free and fair Alberta? And what do you think that looks like? And what party do you think that's behind? Now, again, I'm not telling anybody which way to vote, simply stating that what I'm looking at, what this channel is primarily focused on, is Alberta getting out. And that is where it stays. Where everybody else falls when it comes to the votes is anybody's guess. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Again, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I will have my door open for any other interviews that come forward. Again, keep your eyes open this week. Hoping to have Jeff Rath on the channel to talk about Alberta Prosperity's budget plan, what that could look like in an independent Alberta, as well as any other news coming forward on the front of talking about an independent Alberta. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below in the comments. If it's your first time here, I hope this video has earned your subscription. Again, as you're hitting that button, click the bell for all notifications. Join me live here on the channel each and every Friday night for Friday Night Fringe, our weekly live streaming show where I'm joined by the beautiful Mrs. Fringe as we talk about everything that happened this week in politics, everything we know that's coming up in the week ahead, as well as your Q&A within the greatest YouTube community on the platform, hands down. I look forward to chatting with you guys outside of making these videos, but I most importantly look forward to talking with you this Friday night, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, here on the channel. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.